Well, blessed Monday to you as we come with your daily encouragement. And we're going to start with a very familiar story. We have a tension here about God protecting us and actually ask that question, what does God protect? More importantly, God protects God's mission. But the thing that we are also promised is that God will protect us if we are doing God's mission. And so we have a very famous Bible story, one I remember from Vacation Bible School. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. A story that I think lives on into the New Testament, where Paul in Romans 12 reminds us that we are to be a living sacrifice. And the question is that living, does that last beyond the current temptation, the current test or challenge? Or is it something that we only base on results? Well, in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it was results. And there was a fourth person that walked with them. We're going to ask who that fourth person was. But let us read the story, the famous story from Daniel 3, beginning with verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar, who was filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than was customary. Why was he so mad? Because they had defied the king's order and they had their faith tested. It doesn't say that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had even a chance to reconsider. This was their only option. They had to go through the fiery furnace. And the king ordered some of the strongest guards in the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, and their trousers, their hat, and their other garments. And they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the fiery furnace. Notice they're bound. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, "What is it? Is it not 3 men that you threw bound into the fire?" And they answered the king, "O true king." He replied, "But I see 4 unbound walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the fourth has appeared as of a god." So what happened? They weren't bound. They were bound on earth, but they were unbound in the fire. And now they had a protector God who was leading them through. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of the blazing fire and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here." And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the precepts of the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had the power over their bodies of those men, the hair of their heads, and was not even singed. Their tunics were not harmed, and not even the smell of fire came from them. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent an angel and delivered his servants who trusted him. They disobeyed the king's commands and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree," says Nebuchadnezzar, "any nation or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Famous story, but there's a few things that we need to look at. And once again, I reference also Paul in Romans 12, where he says, "Make yourselves a living sacrifice." And what that means in this case is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three men, were not afraid to go bound into the fire. Now, they didn't know if they were going to come out a bunch of dust. I mean, that's how most people do when they come out of fires. I mean, we're talking about cremation type of temperature where only that comes out is dust. But we have a living God who breathes into the dust of us and makes us into living beings. They were bound, and those bounds were burned away, but their bodies, their hair, their heads were not. There were three that went in, and there were four. We don't know specifically whether Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego saw the fourth person, but the others saw the fourth, the one who walked with them. Just like the footprints in the sand, the famous parable, we sometimes see our God walking with us, but sometimes we may not, and others may see God walking with us. I know sometimes as a pastor, we often joke that when we have our departure parties, sometimes we have great stories that we remember, but there are many times where we were a witness and we don't remember it. But what we were doing was following the dictates, the path, the way that the Lord has for us. And so when we consider when we are facing trials and tribulations, sometimes whether we are like the olive tree of yesterday's reading, whether we have fruit or not, wonder where God is going to put more fertilizer on us and help us grow or is going to chop us down. What we do know is that if we faithfully follow God's example, God's fruit, we will be able to withstand the fiery furnaces that come our way. God bless you today. We trust that these continue to be words of encouragement. Take care. God bless. We'll see you tomorrow.